Welcome back to the Morning Brief right here on Channels Television. And as we continue with our conversation today, we're starting with the petrol price conundrum, dangerously hinged on the vagaries of the price of crude oil in the international market. But of course, there are so many other variables to that. As we say here now, or as we're seeing it, none is exempt, whether, regardless of the rung of the ladder that you belong to. Either it's the middle class, upper middle class, lower middle class, even the elite, according to reports, some are really feeling the pinch right now. But which way Nigeria, as far as petrol price is concerned? Because every other thing, is affected when petrol price goes up. So we're going to be having this discussion today and speaking to energy experts. So joining us today to look at this is Mr. Olapode Showomi, is an oil and gas expert and CEO Captree Limited. Good morning and thank you for joining us on the program, Mr. Showomi.
Good morning. Always a pleasure to be here.
And he's not alone, by the way. We also have Mr. Oyeyemi Okay, I hope I got it. Okay or okay?
Okay.
He's also okay. Yeah, he's also an energy expert and lawyer and accountant. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Showomi, with what seems to be the question that we've been asking, which is a sticking point, really. It seemed like it was it's an anticlimax for Nigerians. We waited for about 5 to 6 years for the Dango Refinery to come on board, which was the hope that Nigeria would exit petrol importation. But it seems that is now eluding Nigerians. So what is the explanation for this? Before we begin to look at alternatives, how Nigerians can adjust to this new regime.
Okay, good morning again, and thanks for the question. I think first and fundamentally, the issue of the Dangote Refinery was not properly reported. And because of the way it was reported, it gave Nigerians the expectation that the prices will increase. The prices will come down. There are certain things that are outside the scope of any refinery when it comes to the price of the distilled products, the distillates. The most important component in terms of the factor that has the most significant price in the metrics is the crude oil itself. And crude oil pricing is quite universal, not because it's a commodity. So to that extent, when the reportage was going on with respect to the Dangote Refinery and what it will have for Nigerians, for some reason, people did not do the research well. The information was not verified. And the business people who stood to benefit from the populist views of that did not think it was necessary for them to correct that notion. So basically, we are left to the same issues as they were. In simple terms, we are left to the reality. What the Dangote Refinery will do at the end of the day is basically to eliminate the cost of transportation in terms if we were to import it. But it should be understood that it is a private refinery. They are not obligated as a private business to sell at the cheapest price. They are obligated to sell at a price that will take care of their shareholders. That's also another important factor that has not been considered. And to that extent, they may not even be cheaper than imported products. So what has just basically happened was the kind of information that Nigerians were fed with. They were not fed with information that actually was a proper balance of the issues. And, once you are not dealing with truths at a point in time, the truth will come to speak. So that's basically what has happened in the case of the Dangote Refinery.
So before I go to Mr. Okay, I'd like to just, follow up on that a bit. That's a difficult pill to swallow, and the explanations are not necessarily adding up, particularly when you think about the fact that, the cost of importation has been eliminated. Port charges, according to analysis of some experts, has also been eliminated. That's on the one hand. And on the other hand, some energy marketers just about 2 weeks ago announced also that the landing cost of petrol has reduced. And, of course, there's also that factor of the reducing, in recent times, cost of crude oil in the international market. And when cost of crude oil reduces, that also impacts on the cost of refined petrol. So why is it not the same for Nigeria?
Okay, so you brought up a number of factors, and they are very valid factors. But you see, the devil is in the details. Until somebody just sits down and actually do the maths and look at the cost component. Because yes, they say the cost of transportation in importation that is reduced. It's not importation itself. It's not the cost of importation per se that's reduced. It's the cost of the transportation. It will be eliminated by the refinery. However, what if the refinery is not being operated optimally? And you don't know the cost of operations or the cost of refining locally may even be higher than the cost of refining abroad. There are many factors that are there. So it's not just enough to highlight these factors. You still have to put the figures into these factors and see how the numbers fall. It is only then only then that you can actually say this thing should be cheaper, this thing should be more expensive. Another important thing is that people seem to forget that the Dango Refinery have not actually said, they've not made it public in terms of how much they are really selling their product. The NNPC has at a time mentioned how much they bought from them, and Dangote said that was not the price. So until you have an idea of how much they are really pushing it out, before you now be able to actually do a proper comparison with what is coming in from outside the country. But the truth be told, this is where the real issues are, is that it's a private business, and the costs, these costs are things that are largely determined by their own internal metrics, not necessarily by populist views. And that there needs to be a balance there in terms of Nigeria's expectations.
Well, I hope that, Nigerians can absorb, internalize that explanation. Let me come to you now, Mr. Oke. Do you have contrary views as to what Mr. Shomi has said, particularly about why energy security seems to be eluding Nigerians, despite, the long wait and arrival of our own homegrown refinery?
Okay. I think I agree with Mr. Shomi. I think it's just to add a few points to what he has mentioned. Now, in as much as the cost of haulage, as it were, or what I would say freight cost rather, may have been eliminated as a result of local refining based on the Dangote Refinery. Let's not forget that some costs or some components of the cost are still dollarized, right? The cost of the investment was largely in USD. Operational costs, I'm sure it will be a mix of USD and Naira. And all of this, as Mr. Shomi has said, would roll up into what we'll call the unit cost, right? And if we are still having fluctuation of the Naira, right, there is a likelihood that we will continue to have perhaps increase in fuel costs. Now, that does not mean that the refinery does not have some of its advantages. I think the big advantage, in my view, would be the fact that we can maybe relatively say we have a bit of energy security in terms of constant supply, right? But the question is at what cost? And I guess that is what is painful to Nigerians as at now. That's one. Two is also the supply of supply of crude to the refinery in Naira, and also the payment for refined products in Naira. What that does is that you have a bit of reduced pressure on the Naira in terms of demand for foreign exchange. Perhaps that may stabilize the exchange rates in the medium to long term. So in as much as it's a private business, costs are dollarized, Naira is fluctuating, or for the lack of better expression, I don't want to say depreciating. These are all the things that determine the pricing of the commodity. And I mean, Whether we like it or not, as Mr. Shomi has rightly said, it's a private business that not necessarily looking at, it will not necessarily look at how this affects you and I as a common man. Every business is established to make profits, and perhaps what needs to be done by government is to ensure that there is what I would call availability of crude oil for the refinery, and two would also be a way whereby we can be looking at things around production subsidy, perhaps as opposed to consumption subsidy.
Well, let me follow up with this one. You're also an accountant as well as a lawyer. Your experience will come to bear here of sorts. First, I think this is just reiterating what the Senate President, Godswill Akpabio, said about the Dango Refinery, putting to shame previous Nigerian governments who could not even fix refineries. So I think we're just making that point clear yet again, that we're now having to depend, and all the conversation seems to be centering around private business, as you said it. So let's come back on track and really focus on the government, those who we have elected, and we expect them to do right by the people. Looking at the current price now of petrol, as an accountant, help us do the adding up. Does it add up for you? Do you really think now is the time? I know that there are other considerations, but the product rather, it does not exist in isolation. It exists in a context. A product is not a product just by itself. It's a product because there are consumers who are willing and able to pay. I think a lot of people are maybe willing, but able to pay is the question right now. So if a liter of petrol is selling for 1,000 plus, a lot of people have not even increased the minimum wage. They've not started earning it. Does it add up? Does the timing add up? Does it make sense, really, at this time that people will be buying petrol for that amount?
I would answer not as an accountant, but I would answer as a Nigerian.
There you go.
And answering as a Nigerian means that there's a lot of pain in our shoes. The earning power is not increasing. If you look at it comparative to how fuel in itself has increased in the last 16 months. I think when this government came into power, it was selling at about 195, and now we're at about 1,000 plus. What that means is that we are over 400% in terms of increase, right? The minimum wage was not increased by 400%. If I'm to do what I will call back of the envelope mathematics. But what my concern is the fact that some of these policies have been introduced in as much as you have government say that there are palliatives or other programs to alleviate the impact. I don't think you and I have seen much change or much effect of those so-called palliatives, and that is where the problem is, because it creates the question of sustainability in terms of removing fuel subsidy 100%. Because what will happen is that the pricing will be subject to the vagaries of the international market and also the strength of the Nigerian currency. Based on the fact that, one, the crude oil is an international commodity, what would happen would be that pricing would always change based on international shocks in the market, as we saw, I think, last week, whereby there were concerns with regards to the escalating tension between Israel and Iran, and how this would also affect the price of the international commodity. So what this means essentially for Nigerians and for you and I is that if we don't take time, or if care is not taken, actually, we may find ourselves buying petrol beyond 1,000 to 1,005 in the event we have increase in the price of crude oil. So to answer your question directly, the mathematics is not adding up in terms of the earning power and the purchasing power, and also the price of the commodity on one side, and also the rippling effect of inflation. Now, what would happen, right, or what we see happen is that perhaps people will start looking at other alternatives, other fuel sources. I see, for example, CNG, and perhaps also looking at other ways to minimize the impact of both the pricing of the commodity and inflation in general. But these, the government initiatives in terms of alleviating the impact of this price change and this shocks needs to be looked at.
Right.
To cascade to you and I as Nigerians.
So, if you say the mathematics is not adding up, then we maybe have to use a different formula. So let me go to Mr. Shoumi. Thank you for that. So, Mr. Shoumi, I remember there was a time that if you had malaria, what will be prescribed will be chloroquine. And after a while, we've seen, the medical world move to something else, perhaps as a result of, resistance to chloroquine, malaria's resistance. Well, it's beta as well, the side effect. So obviously it wasn't quite working. So they had to use something else. We can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. But this is what I need your help with, Mr. Shoumi. The GCO of NNPC Limited has been speaking about subsidy removal, how it was meant to end arbitrage, equalization, and all of that. And he says that it's on track right now. So it would seem that on the end of government, or at least NNPC Limited, which is owned by government, right, they see that this policy is yielding results. But on the side of Nigerians, all they feel from this policy mostly is pain, right? And that's why Mr. says this is not really adding up. So is this the best antidote to the current economic challenge, to the current hardship faced by Nigerians? Is this the best we can do? Some see it as chloroquine. It's bitter. So what is the alternative, really?
Okay, so there are two things to that question. That is actually two questions in one. One is the impact on the economy at the moment, and the other is about economic increase. Basically expansion of the economy, or should I say healing of the economy, so to speak. So for perspective, first of all, I'm not an economic expert, but there is some part of it that is energy related. So on my own part, what I did was do a study of some of the nations that have gone through some of the things we are going through now. UK in the late 70s, when Margaret Thatcher came in and they were trying to move from socialism to more of a free market. China in the 60s, Brazil in the 80s. In the case of Brazil was particularly interesting because just like we were talking about increase every 2 weeks, there was a time that Brazil was experiencing increase twice a day. And things do happen. So in simple terms, when you're trying to reform, these things do happen. That is what we must understand. And that's why I've always said is that if we don't want reform, it's possible we actually don't want reform as a people. We need to actually have a sit down and agree that we don't want reform. We'll continue the way that we should go to. But if we do, then we need to think outside the box. And this is where the healing aspect comes in. One of the things I think that has not been considered very well is the capacity for us to actually earn Forex as individuals and as local components, rather than just looking at a solution from the government only or from a particular place only. And that only resonates with that part where you said that if you have been taking chloroquine for a long time and chloroquine and the body system had grown resistance to the chloroquine, there may be a need to try another drug. Some of the richest nations in the world have some of the least population. And a typical example is the Scandinavian countries. So you're talking about Norway, you're talking about Finland, you're talking about Denmark. Sweden has a population of less than 10 million. Norway has a population of slightly over 5 million. But one of the main things you will find out with these nations, really, is the fact that for their companies, for SMEs there, they encourage them to go abroad from when they are less than 2 years old. But from when they are less than 2 years old. The implication of that is that virtually every company that you have there attracts money from abroad. The implication also is that if we have 5 to 10 companies in every local government, for example, 774 there, and they are encouraged to go abroad, and they start to bring in $10,000. So if you have say $50,000 in every local government that is independent of government, that is independent of the traditional systems of bringing in forex. The implication of that is that you bring in a new income, you change the revolution of how the local governments operate, and you cause a total transformation of things. So those are the things that we need to look at in terms of solutions that can change the way we do things as a nation. That would be my contribution.
And I wonder, how long we're going to be wait for these reforms, to kick in and begin to yield results. And for those countries that you cited, perhaps we should also check what the other results or parameters of their national life was, i.e. cost of housing, cost of energy, other, aspects of energy, besides the cost of petrol, before we conclude, that they're the same in terms of, consequence as far as Nigeria is concerned. But I'd like to follow up on, the issue about transparency. Why, if there was more transparency and accountability in this whole process, will the cost of petrol be less? And I'm coming to you now, Mr. Oke. Do you sense that we're not being told enough that we need to know about the negotiations, between NNPCL and the homegrown refinery? And if there is enough transparency in the whole process, what will be the realistic price of petrol?
So if you recall, and I think that happened about maybe 3 weeks ago with regards to the first volume of products that were lifted from the Dangote Refinery. And it seemed like there was a bit of uncertainty in terms of what the pricing was. I think NNPCL mentioned that the products were lifted at about 898. I think this was debunked by the refinery, but we never got, or the refinery never gave us what the cost was, or the lifting cost was. I agree with you with regards to perhaps there seemed to be some opaqueness in terms of what the lifting cost is. And, apart from the lifting costs, there are other costs like the various levies, the NMDPRA levy, the gas infrastructure levy, and perhaps haulage, before you now look at what the estimated landing cost would be. I think that part in terms of what the levies are and the estimated cost of haulage seems a bit clear. What is not clear as of today is how much actually is the lifting cost from the refinery. Now, perhaps because of the fact that at the time in September, what happened was that it was just a direct sale between, or direct arrangement between NNPCL and the refinery without any other marketer involved. So perhaps maybe on the basis of the agreement which both parties have, they decided not to let us know what the product, what the cost is. But I feel that we may be seeing more transparency now, since we have, or there's a potential that other marketers now come into the fray. We may be seeing greater transparency, also competition in terms of product availability, and this may ultimately affect price. So at the end of the day, yes, transparency may work, but the truth is the other elements of the value chain also needs to be considered, right? And the other elements will be, what is the cost from hauling, perhaps from Lagos to Mobi in Adamawa, right? And the cost is not only cost in terms of Naira and Kobo, the cost also is in terms of what is the state of the infrastructure. If I'm to move from Aja or Ibejuleki, where the refinery is located, up onto Mobi, how many days will it take me? What is the cost per kilometer in terms of maybe diesel costs or CNG costs, depending on the fuel which the relevant trucks are using? And all of this will roll up into determining what the unit cost would be.
And you know, those questions are important because there are reports that groups are urging the NNPCL to remove so many hidden charges from the cost of petrol purchased from Dangote Refinery. And besides that, you know, we got reports today also that the company has released 15 billion naira worth of fuel to marketers. So the question again is there any obstruction to direct negotiation between the marketers and Dangote Refinery? They're all very important. But let's move to alternatives now. And this is especially important for Nigerians. What should they be doing now? My colleague talked earlier about how, you know, the minimum wage, 70,000 naira, has not even begun to be implemented for some, yet they must adjust to the current reality. So is a CNG a viable alternative for the majority of Nigerians? Have we achieved the necessary penetration for a good number of Nigerians to say, oh, I want to transit to CNG? Help us do the calculation. What is the cost of conversion? And, you know, what would be the price of CNG is it per liter now? Or, you know, the amount that Nigerians would require to do the necessary travel per month? Mr. Shomi, let me bring that to you now.
Okay, thank you very much. I think gas has always been cheaper. And CNG, even though it is given high-powered attention by the government now, has been around for more than 10 years, with NIPCO having done something in Benin, where they had a trial station. The issue about CNG in terms of its practicalities to Nigerians is about the spread and the infrastructure for it. And that's also the bane of a lot of the domestication of our energy options. So if you look at petrol, because petrol will be using it for close to 100 years, there are filling stations in virtually every hamlet anywhere in this nation. You cannot, so you will need something like that for CNG to be practical. So, but in terms of the science of it, in terms of the economics of it, it's definitely a viable option. In fact, it's definitely a cheaper option. So I've mentioned infrastructure. The next part of it is the upstream part. Yes, we have gas. We're a gas nation. But that gas needs to be processed for it to be useful. So it's like having river water or ocean water around you. You can have a lot of river water, but you may not have drinking water. So the gas that we need to use, that Nigerians need to use, that will be converted to CNG, LPG, and all that needs to be processed, we do not at the moment have that kind of upstream investment, upstream amount of gas that will take care of the nation at the scale that we exist. So there needs to be investment in the upstream aspect for gas. That's also another very important factor. But once those two factors, in terms of the spread of infrastructure, is taken care of, in terms of upstream investments are taken care of, then very well, you have a significant option to petrol. Not only will it drive petrol down by the forces of competition, it will also give Nigerians something that is safer for their vehicles, which will make the engine to last longer, and something that is definitely cheaper. So ultimately, the right attention is being given, the right pressure is also being given, and we hope the hindering factors will be removed in the shortest possible time.
Ms. Oka, do you want to speak to the costing as well? Because it's easier said, right, than done. It's even cheaper said than done at the same time. So what is the cost eventually? Does it really add up again when you look at the earnings of Nigerians?
As Mr. Shoumi has said, I think pricing of CNG is, relatively cheaper, right? Perhaps based on the pricing which we have today is about 25% of the cost of a liter when you compare it with what the fuel, the PMS is saying. So essentially, if we do rough mathematics, what it means is that if I'm using a CNG powered vehicle, I'm having 75% savings, as opposed to another person who is driving a PMS fueled car. But Mr. Shomi also mentioned something about infrastructure, and I'll tell you, I will give you what I call a practical example with regards to a business which I'm involved in. which is a logistics business that was considering converting its trucks to a CNG-powered vehicle or CNG-powered vehicles. And one of the concerns which we had were two concerns. One is infrastructure, which Mr. Shomi has said. I mean, if I'm supposed to take a truck, let's say from Lagos to Kano, for example, the question is, where are the CNG stations, right? Where can I refuel? And because of the fact that the CNG as a type of fuel has lower density, so what it means is that it's not heavy and it burns quicker. So I may not be able to use the trucks, to say, oh, I have loaded a truck, let's say, for example, from Lagos that is going to Kano without refueling at some point. And that made some type of, made the business halt its decision in terms of CNG conversion. So we need significant investment around permission of refuel stations before we can have the impact or the desired impact. In terms of investment also, Mr. Shoumi has also mentioned the challenge on the upstream investment side. And again, one of the things that needs to be considered is before we can attract the type of upstream investment that we want, we need to also look at pricing. And perhaps maybe that would also lead to issues around escalation of pricing, because as of now, gas prices are fairly regulated by the regulators, and that is also a consideration. But to answer your question directly, CNG definitely is a viable alternative. We need infrastructure to be able to push it, and definitely it is cheaper than gasoline as of today.
And the question really is the investment in the necessary measure of infrastructure, is it being done as fast enough? Because the price of petrol is not waiting for anyone. It keeps going up. So how long do we need to wait for the needed penetration such that a good number of Nigerians can begin to transit to CNG? And the regulation that you talk about is it affecting price of conversion as much as it is affecting the price that CNG itself is being sold? I ask this because there were reports that conversion was 250,000 naira. But I don't know how far it is true, but it's being said now it's being increased to 800,000 naira. Maybe you should quickly answer that, and then you can take Mr. Shomi's last words as well.
Okay, so the cost of conversion, when the initiative was introduced, I think in November last year, the cost of conversion was estimated between 300 to 600,000 naira. Again, do not forget that some of these conversion kits are imported, if not all, right? And what this means is that if you have a fluctuating currency, again, I would want to run from depreciating currency. But if you have a fluctuating currency, what would happen is that you will find out that the cost would increase as the currency continues to fluctuate. And that would be the reason for the increase from perhaps 250 to 800,000 naira. Now, let's not forget that what government has done is to say, oh, we would have 1 million free installation kits for public transportation vehicles, right? What that means is that private owners will have to pay out of pocket. And the question you need to look at is, if I pay 800 to 1 million naira as the cost of conversion, what am I actually saving if I amortize it over a period of time? Is the savings actually sensible, bearing in mind also that I would need specialized types of mechanics to be able to attend to my vehicle on a go-forward basis? Yeah, so those are some of the things to consider with regards to the cost of conversion.
And even if the cost incurred would be made up for later on, it's important for these things to have a human face as well. Hence, the need for us to continue to ask the questions about regulation. We must anchor at this point. Pardon me, Mr. Shomi, we must anchor. I was going to take your last words, but we're out of time now. I'd like So thank you so much, gentlemen. Mr. Olabode Shomi, oil and gas expert and CEO Captree Limited. Thank you so much for your time. And Mr. Oyeyemi Oke, energy expert, lawyer and accountant. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And we'll pause for a break now. When we return, we'll hop on to the next leg of our conversation. So stay with us. We'll be right back.